So this morning I wanted to talk about a little bit about the use of the imagination in our practice. And we had a day long yesterday in, I think it's San Marino, uh, at a yoga studio there. And we were talking about that. The day was really dedicated to forgiveness and talking about the importance of that and how do we do that and inspiring examples of that and so forth. And I realized that uh, we use our imagination in our meditation a lot, but very few people talk about that ever because the idea is, as somebody asked a great question yesterday, like, I thought that mindfulness meant that we stay with just what's happening, just what's here in the moment, and that if we're starting to imagine other things, that's a distraction in our meditation. So, what about that? I asked you to do a little bit of loving kindness toward the second half of the meditation, just to bring some sort of suffuse the mindful awareness that with some tenderness and love. And were you able to do that? How many people actually tried that? So most everybody tried. And were you able to um, call to mind or bring to mind something that allowed you to relax and feel just a little more loving in that moment? So that's a use of the imagination because that was not here. Strictly speaking, there's nothing here but the breath, the body, whatever we see, hear, taste, touch, think, and feel in the moment. Um, but we're actually using our imagination all the time in our meditation. And certainly when we do the practices that we call Brahma vihara practices, which are Brahma means divine, vihara means dwelling place. So these are the divine, the beautiful places that the heart can dwell in: love, compassion, joy, equanimity. Um, and those are the classic four. We could add gratitude, the perfections that Norman Fisher will be talking about next week, generosity, and uh, there are lots of ways that whenever we incline our minds deliberately in a certain direction, we are actually using our imagination to help with that. And it's very different from the way that our imagination generates daydreams when we're sitting, or just sort of fantasies, sexual fantasies, or you know, I think of them often as sensual food or whatever, fantasies, what I'm going to eat when I get home, those kind of things. And before you know it, there you are making your food instead of sitting here, or how you're going to jump in the water, whatever you're going to do. It's a different use of the imagination than just following a distraction. It's intentional, it's purposeful, and it's creative. It allows us. Awareness is, I think, by its nature, observing, of course, but also creative, because awareness sees, like I said at the beginning, when we look at where the mind goes when it wanders, instead of, like, I don't know, if you're riding a horse and it leads down to eat grass and you just like jerk the head up, instead of sort of jerking ourselves back to the present moment, come back, get back here. It's a different, if we look and see, oh, my mind likes to think about, fill in the blanks, whatever the mind likes to think about. And sometimes we don't want to see that because the mind likes to think about a particular revenge fantasy over and over and over. Or it likes to get stuck in a sexual fantasy, looping round and round and round. Or some of the places that our minds go are not pretty places, or they're not places that we think of as uplifting or spiritual. But I think one of the most generous and creative aspects of our awareness and of mindfulness in general is it can go anywhere. It isn't afraid to go anywhere, and it isn't destroyed or spoiled or um, contaminated. No matter we're thinking the most loathsome thought, whatever that thought would be to you, uh, awareness can be aware of that. Mindfulness can see and know that. But the awareness of the mindfulness are completely unaffected. They're just seeing, just knowing. And so, honestly, from the perspective of our meditation practice, it doesn't really matter whether we're having sublime spiritual thoughts. Oh my gosh, every time I went on retreat, I used to fantasize about other retreats. While I was in the retreat, I would fantasize, yes, so and so has a cabin and I could probably go there and I could. And it's so insane when you realize, actually, I'm in a retreat right now, fantasizing about the next one or the one that I wish I was in, or, the mind has no pride, it will go anywhere. But when we become aware of what the mind is doing and what it likes to do, the more we sit with ourselves, and it does take time and practice, because the more we do this, the more we start to have almost a kind of amused, humorous, affectionate tolerance for what the mind does. We stop taking it so personally and making it a story about how good we are, how bad we are, how sublime we are and spiritual, or what a loathsome worm we are. I don't mean to offend worms. I told you the story last week about Ram Dass and his guru, and how he always loves to say that his guru is the fisherman and we are the fish and he is the worm, the bait, in other words. So I don't want to malign worms, but you understand what I'm saying, that we come to a point where we begin to realize that the contents of our mind are, it's like flowing water and changing weather. And although we may have plans and get disappointed if the weather, or if we live in the Bahamas, we may be terrified about the weather right now. But at the same time, we don't take it personally. We don't believe a hurricane is coming because of anything that we did or didn't do. And we just know that it's not about us. And in some ways, the same is true for the states of mind that we travel in and out of. They're more personal because they happened in this brain, because they're ours. But this is where I think the role of the imagination comes in. One of the classic practices in Buddhism is to imagine the Buddha, to hold a picture in your mind. And you know how those Buddha statues, they look so peaceful and serene that people who have no connection to Buddhist practice put them in their gardens because they're pretty and they evoke peaceful states. And when I first moved here, I would walk, on the ocean, by the ocean or by the boardwalk. And I remember I would pass sometimes houses where there would be a Buddha in the yard. I would get all excited and think, oh, I'll probably meet them someday because they're Buddhist practitioners. And then I realized, no, it's a way to evoke, to imagine a state of serenity and of peacefulness, a state that we might not even be in at all at that moment. And our meditation, the awareness, when we look at things over and over again, they begin to loosen their grip on us. If it's our favorite demons that usually completely frighten us, when you see them for the, 1008th time, it's sort of like, oh, you again. It doesn't pack the same wallop. It's not as scary. And it can loosen our obsession with a storyline. And one of the ways that our creative awareness works is that it shows us different ways of being. We can take a task that, I don't know, we might consider to be a menial task, like weeding the garden or chopping the vegetables, folding the laundry. And a task like that, when we bring full attention to it, we notice things we never noticed before, smells and colors and um, the soothingness of repetitive physical motions, and in that noticing the act, it comes alive, whatever it is. It becomes the landscape of our life in a very alive way. And so we can transform work that we do. We can notice when we're doing things, including meditating, with a kind of mechanical, habitual, but kind of tired, dull mind. And we can begin to see that, and we can imagine what might help. Maybe getting some fresh air and going for a walk. Maybe we're just tired and we need to take a nap. Maybe we need a hot bath. What is it? What is it that we need? This is something that it's an activity of the imagination. And often when we dismiss something, we'll say something like, well, it's only the imagination. It's dismissive. But the imagination is the source of our creativity. It's the source of our inspiration. And through meditating, we also start to see how we overlay on our basic sensory data, how we overlay so many ideas and theories. I heard the Supreme Justice, Sonia Sotomayor, who has a book coming out, a children's book called Just Ask. I heard her speak on the radio, and she told a story about how she was in the bathroom injecting herself with insulin. She's a diabetic, so she needs to do that. And somebody was in the restroom and saw her. And then when she was leaving the restaurant, she was passing their table and she overheard them say, "Oh, she's a drug addict," to the person that they were with. And she stopped and she said, what you saw me doing was injecting insulin, and that my body needs that insulin to stay alive because I'm a diabetic. And she uses this as an entry point to, if you don't understand what you're looking at or you have a question, just ask. Ask. Inquire. That woman used her imagination in a way that is not, well, it's very creative, but it isn't the way that we're talking about here. Here, we want to use our imagination in a way that my first teacher, the Korean Zen master, he used to call it Dharma play. And whenever we did something like a loving kindness practice, where you call people to mind that you love, if you've never done this practice, it's a practice that is used to grow our capacity for love, just like the compassion practice is for strengthening compassion or joy or equanimity. And in this practice, you call to mind first yourself, with the assumption that you love yourself best, but that isn't true for everybody. So sometimes it's somebody who's helped you, a benefactor, or just somebody you love, and you call them to mind so that you can begin to access some sense of affectionate or fond or warm or friendly feeling in your heart. And then you wish them well, and the practice is designed to build on that. It might just be a little shred of warmth in an otherwise very icy heart moment, but you build on that and you cultivate that and you strengthen that. And if you keep at it, it absolutely works. And it's not that you may find yourself in love with the world or everybody, but you do find yourself with your heart freed of states of resentment and holding grudges and ill will and some of the things that torment us. Anger, it's an antidote to anger. This is all using the imagination to call somebody to mind, who's suffering, and we practice compassion. I feel with you. So these practices of using our imagination, my teacher called Dharma play. And I love this quote from the Indian poet Tagore, who once said, "The stronger the imagination, the less imaginary the results. That by using our imagination in this way, we actually get real results in our being, in our lives. Our lives begin to change. We notice that we're a little more confident, that we feel maybe a little more friendly. Our lives begin to change little by little. And I don't know how it works exactly, and I'm not that interested in the mechanisms of how it works. I'm a very practical person. I'm interested in the fact that it works, that it does seep into our lives, and we can change things. One teacher goes so far as to say mindfulness and imagination are actually the same thing, different words for the same deep experience, because they both are powerful ways of developing and using our awareness. I don't know if that's exactly so, but I like it. I like that idea. And our imagination also is what happens when our preoccupation with ourselves falls away. You know, if we're just completely preoccupied with something that happened, I was afraid that I had hurt somebody's feelings the other day. It's somebody who's working really hard. I value her. It turns out it was fine, but I thought I had hurt her feelings, and I was preoccupied with that. How could I have hurt her feelings? Very preoccupied. There's not much imagination going on there. That's a kind of obsessive loop of thought. For us to have imagination that's creative, that is showing us something new, a new possibility for our life, a new fresh thought, not just the top 10 usual suspects, a new fresh one, a moment of inspiration. You know, this is the creative imagination that it really comes forth and happens when our preoccupation with ourselves lessens, becomes less. And that's something that happens with our meditation. And so by engaging in these Dharma play practices, we can transform our experience of our everyday world. And it can become much more a sense of a sacred or magical world. And there is magic. I was talking to somebody here last week. There is real magic that happens when you begin to know. Somebody pops into mind and that phone rings and it's that person, right? You begin to know things. And I think that's a kind of sacred magic that happens in our life. So last week I talked so much that we had very little time for conversation together. And I have a lot of notes and things to share with you, but I actually would like to have more dialogue today. And I just want to close this part of my speaking with a poem that I have read here before, probably a couple times before, but to me it's one of the examples of a creative use of the imagination. And it's called Why I Opted for the More Expensive Oil at Jiffy Lube. And if you've heard me read it before, you probably don't remember the whole thing anyway. So, why I opted for the more expensive oil at Jiffy Lube. This one is better for a car as old as yours, he says. It won't glob up, he says. And spring is almost here. So of course you need a thicker oil. And I say, so with this good oil, my car will run better. And it'll be washed and waxed every time I get in. And he says, yes, and you'll never have to put another drop of gas in it. And when I start the car, a big bag of money will appear in the back seat. Yes, he says, and cash will shoot out your exhaust pipe. And people will be glad when they see you coming. And will I look rested, like I've gotten plenty of sleep every night? That goes without saying, he says. And when I roll over in bed and look at the man who says he loves me, will I believe him? You, he says, won't be able to believe anything else. Your heart will soak up the goodness, and you'll smile and beam and sigh like a pig in mud. And what about my parents, I ask? This part always makes me cry. Will this oil keep them from dying? They're very old. Let's call them and tell them the happy news, he says. This is a use of the imagination, right? Every work of art, poem, story, whatever it may be, it's a use of the imagination. So let's not, when we're meditating, get too tight around how we practice. We can relax, and we can notice when we're lost in a fantasy, and when it's a little more creative, a little more imaginative than that. And next week, Norman Fisher is coming with his wife, Kathy. They have practiced Zen and taught Zen together. They're both Zen priests in the Soto Zen tradition for 40 years. And in his appreciations, in acknowledgments in this book, he thanks his wife, Kathy, and says, "It is to her I owe my happiness all these years." I loved that. Just so sweet. And they're coming to teach a day long next week. And he is going to, here he says, Kathy Fisher, with whom I have engaged in dialogue about the religious life for more than 40 years, and to whom I owe my happy life. I like that. They're coming to teach on, this is Norman's new book. It's called The World Could Be Otherwise, Imagination and the Bodhisattva Path. Bodhisattva means awakening being, and it really is about setting aside the clinging that we have to I, me, my, how will this help me? How will this hurt me? Setting that aside to be of service in the world. So, yes, they are coming next week. And after next Sunday, I go out to the desert to teach what will be my last, I mentioned this last week too. I just want to remember to mention it, the last longer retreat of the year. I'm going to be, I'm taking a sabbatical from longer retreats in 2020 to do some writing. And when we talk about creative imagination, I notice that when I'm teaching the retreats, which are really a full-on, from early in the morning, often before dawn until late at night, there's a lot of preparation. There's a lot of thinking about that I like to do and enjoy doing. And I actually prefer to my own creative work. Because sitting in front of a blank page when you've decided to take time to write can be a terrifying experience. She's smiling. The poet, Angela, is smiling with recognition. So this retreat center is large and luxurious. There is a swimming pool and a hot tub. You can still sign up. Okay, but it starts next Sunday. So let's have some time for some dialogue. And I am now remembering, instead of waiting till the end, to remind you on the live stream and all of you here. You on the live stream, please remember to press the donate button. If you're afraid you'll forget, you could do it right now. And everybody here, some people leave when we have the discussion time, although in some ways that is the richest time. It's our refuge in Sangha or community. But if you do need to go, there is the equivalent of the donate button out. It's an alms bowl. It's out on the desk in front. And I invite you to give what you can. Generosity makes you happy. I want you to leave really happy. So that will support the teacher, the teachings, and the center. And there's a lot more to say about that. I'll say a little more at the end because I want to hear from you. So somebody will pass the mic. So for those of you who are new, this is a time you can ask anything, any simple question about your practice, your meditation. It's also a time when you can share something that may have happened as a result of your practice in your life. And we are learning from each other here. One Tibetan Lama used to talk about how we learn from each other's confusion. I thought, how can I learn from, right? How can we learn from each other's confusion? But we do, because it becomes clear. So who would like to, yes, me back. You.
So this is a question.
Good.
Last week, it's not on? I'm just not talking
It's
about
on,
it.
you just have to hold it closer.
Last week you mentioned you talked about Ram Dass
Yes.
and LSD and the experience that you had. Not really about the experience that you had, but you talked how it affected you.
Yes.
And I'm just curious. I wanted to ask last week, but I was too shy. But I'm wondering how it changed your practice, if it did.
Okay, I'll tell you. But before I tell you, I'm curious because this is a question that's lasted for a week, so it means something to you. Can you tell me what or why? Do you know?
I do, because I've never done LSD, and I've been a practitioner for a very, very long time, and I know teachers who have, and I just have been afraid, and I wonder if it creates a shift in the mind. I'm not talking about on a regular basis, but even just once, that allows our being, our wakefulness, wider, more expansive.
Great, thank you. So it's also a question about the use of medicines or psychedelics, entheogens, to change our practice. And I want to be clear, I did not take LSD when I was at Ram Dass's house.
No, I know that, yeah.
But it brought up, yes, I know. Well, there's new people here, so I'm just making it clear that didn't happen that time. It did happen in my life, 45 years ago. So I was really very young, and I'm not making excuses because in my generation, in those days, many people were using consciousness expanding medicines and drugs for that purpose, and many of the meditation teachers sort of got started that way. But since then, also, we've learned a lot about the dangers, and I lost a family member who sort of never came down for a long, long time and was psychotic. So, I'm very aware of the dangers. I don't recommend, you can't recommend that to somebody. It's like recommending getting married or, no, do you know what I mean? You just can't. Or having a baby. I mean, it could be great. So I'm not recommending. Nowadays, it seems I haven't done this because these days I'm not doing this, but nowadays it seems that people are using ayahuasca, plant medicine, to have different healing experiences. I haven't done that, so I can't speak to that. But I think that at the heart of your question is, am I missing something? Is there something more that would help my practice? And is this something that could help my practice? Maybe. I don't know your practice intimately enough. But the main thing I would say is that those experiences that we had were before we had access to meditation practice. Many of us. We were not long-time meditators like you. We were... right? Some of us were hippies. Some of us were just living in the 60s. We just were doing what our friends were doing.
The whole Timothy Leary and that crowd.
And some people had transcendent experiences and some people didn't. And then some people went nuts. I mean, it was really a roll of the dice. May I ask you, what are the tears? What is something moving, touching your heart?
You answering.
Yeah. So remember, we were not who you are today when we did that. And if you've been practicing for a long time, have you done any silent meditation retreats?
Yes, I with my teachers are Larry Rosenberg and Joseph Goldstein and Sharon Salzberg, and I've been to Barry a few times, no longer than 7 days each time.
Well, if you want to have more psychedelic experience, sit a longer retreat.
Perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah. And by the way, Larry is the one who introduced me to my very first teacher. He was living with me, not romantically, but we were living in a communal house together. And he found our Korean Zen master who was working in a laundromat in Providence, Rhode Island, because he didn't have English yet, and living in an apartment with a few Brown students from Brown University who had found him and were practicing with him. So, yeah. So Larry is the first person who taught me to meditate. I would see him sitting cross-legged in the backyard, and I was just so curious, like, what is he doing back there? So, yeah, he taught me.
Wow.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So anybody else? Yeah. Tur. Oh, you're passing it. Okay.
Hello.
Hi.
Yeah, I had a question come up during the loving kindness meditation, because my experience was that everything that sparked joy was attached to grief. So then there's a judgment of, I don't know. So I don't know.
What, like you're not doing it right or something like that? What is
like you can't experience joy. I don't know.
You're failing at joy.
Yeah,
Something like
and
that.
and you can't have that. So yeah, I suspect that then I should just do grief meditations, so that, and then maybe the joy will come in. I don't know.
Well, I don't know you, so I don't know if you're pushing away your grief, and so it's just sneaking in where it can get some recognition, and be known to you. And I don't know how recent your grief is, because if you're recently bereaved and have lost somebody and are grieving, everything will be mixed with grief.
Okay.
Everything. And it's okay, because that is the bittersweet truth of life. You are actually closer to the truth of what life is when your joy is mixed with grief. And it's not the exuberant, ooh, joy, but it's really seeing that, what is it? Kiss the joy as it flies. And every insight actually comes with some grief. Because there's the joy of realizing or seeing something that we didn't see before, which can be liberating. That's what we're practicing for, liberation. But then there's, why didn't I see this sooner? My life could have been different. And there's grief for the blindness or the unconsciousness or the whatever, unawareness before. So I would say that you're not failing at joy. You're just in a time of your life where grief is going to be with you. I think, even if you forget it for a while, depending on how bereaved you are, it could be a few minutes or a few hours or even a few days. But eventually it just comes and it grabs you by the ankle and pulls you under. And that's its nature. It comes in waves. So I don't think it means you're not allowed to be joyful or your joy part of you is defective or something at all. I'm glad you asked.
That's a really good answer. What was that quote that you said?
Oh, it's from William Blake. Kiss the joy as it flies.
I love it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I was interested in using the imagination and sort of learning from the thoughts that come in during meditation. A lot of my thoughts are either dread or regret. And so I've been trying to use the meditation to just clear those away, because they're sort of like a soundtrack. They're like the CD carriage in an old car that keeps rotating and repeating. So I was hoping, and maybe this isn't the right way to approach it, that by really trying to be present and, I'm here now. I forget what exact words you used, but I just was using those over and over and did kind of clear up my mind. I don't know if that's the most effective way for me to overcome this constant.
How's it working?
Today it worked.
Then it's effective.
Yeah.
If it works, it's effective. Is it the most effective? I don't know. You'd have to try everything in the world and see.
Usually it doesn't work that well. Usually they creep in.
It's helpful to be in the group.
Yeah.
You get support from meditating together.
I definitely find that.
And I mean, really for millennia, people have been doing this communally, because what is it Jack always likes to quote Annie Lamott? My mind is like a bad neighborhood. I don't want to go there alone, or I'm afraid to go there alone. So it's helpful to be with the group. I think many of us experience a lot of fear and dread these days because of the situation in the world and the fact that we know it more and more. And the best way to work with that is the way that works for you, honestly. So if it doesn't always work so well, you can try other things. Like you can try changing the channel and doing some loving kindness practice, for example, or some compassion practice for yourself, just putting a hand on your heart and acknowledging how painful those feelings are. They're dreadful. They are full of dread. So you know what I'm saying? You can experiment. And I think that hopefully part of what you will take away from today is the permission to experiment more in your practice. Because making the practice your own is so important. We all have to get instructions at the beginning and follow those instructions because we're trying to learn something new. But at a certain point, we can also get very bound by those instructions, and we can get into our old patterns of either trying to be the best student or just convinced we're the worst, or, you know what I mean? We can use that process for our neurotic patterns. So it's good to change it up and try some different things. And that's very different from how I was taught. I was taught and there's strength in building concentration that way, because with more concentration, it fuels the awareness too. Awareness becomes more creative and present more of the time and enriching. So I'm not saying the concentration isn't important. I'm just saying we get kind of tight, especially around trying to be good and do things. I mean, look, our whole school history is teaching us to try and be good and do things right. It doesn't really work in meditation. No. So
I believe that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. It's really good to be here.
Glad
have this
you're here.
opportunity to ask questions. This question is regarding loving kindness meditation.
Mm-hmm.
Where does forgiveness fit in to that to this practice, because I know a lot of us can have a hard time with it. I think some may consider one and the same, or we can separate them. Pardon me. And I feel they may not be the same, and we can look at them differently and maybe even meditate on them differently. Because while we can send out metta, we may not like the people we're sending the metta to. Actually, that's what the practice is for, right?
Oh, partly.
Partly, right. We don't have to like them, but
that's right.
It's really it's ourselves, and
it's to free our
healing,
hearts,
right?
from
free our hearts.
The irritation, the annoyance,
yes,
the hatred,
right.
Whatever we're feeling toward them.
Right. So we're not necessarily forgiving the people we're sending. I mean, even if we're having trouble or conflict with somebody specifically, or somebody general, or whatever political figures.
No, we're not forgiving them.
Right. Yeah. Okay, good. This is what I'm trying to get at. Right. What are we doing? Exactly. Are we forgiving that? What are we doing?
But we're
and
not
also, we
saying
don't want to
they're
get fixated
unforgivable.
on specific people. Right? Go ahead. Thank you.
So, no, it's an interesting question, because we're wishing them well. That's all we're doing. And we're wishing them well to establish kind of a new groove in our own consciousness, so that we aren't caught in states, like I was saying before, of resentment, looping obsessive revenge fantasies, or just like hatred. I mean, states that are really unpleasant for us. That 12-step expression, if you just hate somebody and you ruminate about it, you're drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. So that's what we want to stop doing. The things that poison are poisonous for us and our hearts. So we wish them well, we wish them well, we wish them well. And we wish them well, we can overcome our resistance to wishing people well that we don't like by just thinking, okay, I often have thought to myself, well, if that person was really happy, if they really were the things I'm wishing for them, happy, safe, feeling well, living with ease, they wouldn't be so obnoxious. Or they wouldn't be hurting me, or they wouldn't, so there is some, you can work it out so there's some personal gain for you. If it feels too steep to just genuinely wish that person well because you really don't like them, forgiveness is a whole different thing. It's linked, but it's really different, as you say, because forgiveness means that we are actually willing to release whatever it is that we are holding about the hurt, the betrayal, the abandonment, whatever happened to us in the context of this other person, the abuse. And I was telling a story yesterday. I wish you would come to our day long. It was on forgiveness. That would have been good. But I was telling a story yesterday about, I had just read this book by Eve Ensler. You know who Eve Ensler is. She wrote the Vagina Monologues, that play. And the book is called The Apology. And in this book, it's an act of imagination. See, you can't even say the word vagina without somebody cracking up. This is part of what the Vagina Monologues, anyway, it's about that word too, as well as that part of our bodies, some of our bodies. And The Apology is a work of creative imagination, because what she does is she goes through her whole history from a certain age with her father, who sexually abused her for years as a little girl. And she imagines, the book is written from his perspective and in his voice. And so it's a complete act of imagining what he's thinking and feeling while he's doing what he does, and how their relationship developed, and it's a rugged read. I don't recommend it. But it's a short book. But what was amazing about it is at the end of the book, she imagines the apology that he never would have given her. He died. He's already passed away when she writes this book. But at the end, the apology is completely in character with this man. He doesn't say, I'm so sorry. He just says, I really see how I broke you by doing that to you. It's a very cold but but he acknowledges it. And that's what she needed, was the acknowledgement. And forgiveness doesn't mean condoning, it just means that we are ready to accept, if it's ourselves, we accept our imperfections, we accept that we make mistakes, we're being kind in that way. If it's others, we're extending that same kindness and understanding that, look, we're in this together, we all mess up, we hurt each other, we trip over each other, and worse. We have a choice. I've thought about this a lot because I have had this sort of childlike part of my nature that is always shocked when people do bad things. And I was actually in the supermarket the other day, and it occurred to me, I'm old, and it occurred to me, do I want to spend the rest of my days being shocked by human behavior? No, I don't. And Jack has gotten used to it. I'll tell him, I've been working with this group in Tucson, and their teacher, oh my God, he did this and this and this. And it's all out in the open now. And I'm like very, kind of incensed about it. And then he'll just look at me and say, I'm shocked. Because he knows me. He knows I'm shocked. Doesn't matter. I've been in this world of Dharma communities 40 years. Believe me, this is not the first time I have seen teacher misconduct. But I'm just saying, so I think forgiveness, I'm glad you asked that question. And maybe we'll do some forgiveness practice for everybody next week. That it's something I can always use it, if only to forgive myself for being who I am, So we'll do some of that next week. So we have time for, does anybody have a question from live stream? You can type it in. Angela will read it to us. Question or comment? Okay. Anybody else here? We have time for one more. Yes. You were waiting.
So you talked a little bit about these, say like a magical moment where maybe you're thinking about someone, they give you a call, or you talked about
synchronicities. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And talked about how, when we meditate as a group, sometimes you get so much more out of it. Or when we do metta, we send kind of good vibes, or in other traditions, maybe you pray for someone. I'm just curious, like the thinking behind that in Buddhism, or like explanations for that, or like how is that in terms of like collective consciousness, like what is that?
I have no idea. Yeah. This is something that is mysterious to us now, and it may not be in the future. We may come to, and I think, we feel like we know so much about the brain now that we have these functional MRIs and can see things, but our knowledge is very rudimentary. We really don't know so many things about our brains. And just a moment. And so, but I think of it the way, for example, I talked about this a little bit yesterday too, that we know now that trauma is transmitted intergenerationally, that children who are kids of, say, Holocaust survivors, they may have terrifying Holocaust dreams. Their parents have never talked about their experience. How does that get transmitted? Well, we have discovered that actually there are genes, markers, for how these things get transmitted down the generations. So now that used to be very mysterious to me, because I worked as a psychotherapist. I worked a lot with severely dysregulated, disturbed kids and their families. And I would wonder, how does a parent's disturbance that they don't talk about, but their inner obsession, come out in this child's drawings? Like, how does that happen? Do you know what I mean? Like, we're coming to understand this. So there may be an answer to your question. And Tur, you had something to say, right?
I wanted to ask a question, or not ask a question, I had a comment. I wanted to thank you for talking about imagination, because imagination is very important, in my opinion, in my experience. One of the things I've been doing for the last 20 years is practicing and teaching Chinese martial arts. One of those martial arts is called Yichuan, which translates into mind boxing.
Oh,
There's no techniques.
I could do that.
We could all do that, and we all do. It's very interesting because one of the key teachings is from the unreal, creating real results.
Which is exactly what Tagore said.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That really resonated. I just wanted to thank you for
Yeah,
talking about
thank
that. It's
you.
very
I
important.
thought you were going to talk about the brain, but yeah,
I could,
you.
but you don't have time.
Okay. What's your name in the green T-shirt? You. Ethan, thank you for that question. I think it's a really interesting question, and I hope I get to be alive when we find out the answer. You know, there's so many psychic phenomena and things that would be so interesting to know about. Yeah, thank you. So we've really come to the end of our time together, our wonderful time together. Thank you for coming and practicing. And so let's sit for just a couple minutes. So as we sit together with the resonance, the reverberations of our conversation, we also have a chance to appreciate this great privilege that we have to be able to gather like this and study and practice these teachings together. And it's traditional at the end of a period of practice like this to offer our gratitude and appreciation for the teachings and for the community that we practice with, for the teachers, for the whole experience. And we do this through an act of the imagination. And we say, may the goodness of our practice, we want to share the goodness of our practice with all beings everywhere, without exception. And then we imagine a world. What if all beings really did have a chance to receive these teachings, to put them into practice, to grow in love and understanding? And we offer the heartfelt wish, may we and all beings mature and grow in wisdom and love. So thank you, everybody. Please know that you can volunteer and let Jasmine know if you're interested in volunteering on Sunday. We have a big group of volunteers, so nobody has to come every single week. And also you can volunteer to match whatever money offering is given on a Sunday. And you can say, you know what, this Sunday I'd like to match the dana. We call it gift or giving dana. You might find out that, oh my gosh, this one Sunday the dana was amazingly huge. It was $1,000. Well, actually, I think I'd like to match 500 of that. You don't have to match the whole thing. You can become a monthly donor, which we love. You know, think what you spend one time when you go out to dinner with a friend. You could give that one time to InsightLA and really deepen your connection and your roots in your practice by doing that. So again, the teaching is that generosity makes us happy. May you leave very happy. And see you next week.